Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ricky Bentley. I'm the program manager at the Connecticut Land Conservation Council, or CLCC. We are the statewide umbrella organization for Connecticut's land trusts. CLCC works to advance your conservation efforts through advocacy, funding opportunities, technical assistance, and capacity building programs like this webinar series. We're thrilled to launch our new six-part series, Keeping the Promise: Core Skills for Effective Land Stewardship. This series was developed in partnership with the Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy to help land trust staff and volunteers uphold the forever promise we make with every easement and fee property. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be diving into the practical skills needed to ensure the enduring integrity of your stewardship programs. Before we get started, I just have a couple notes. There is a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, we highly encourage your participation. We'll address questions at the end, though we may answer a few throughout the presentation if time allows. And as you heard, this session is being recorded. We'll make the video available on our YouTube channel and share the link with you soon, along with any resources that were talked about during this presentation. Additionally, a very important note for an event happening tomorrow, April 22nd. Join us for Land Conservation Day at the Capitol. This is an opportunity to bring the importance of land conservation directly to our legislators and demonstrate the incredible impact our community has across the state. If you haven't signed up, you can register on our website. Now, I'm happy to pass it off over to Mary Walsh from Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy.
Welcome. I'm going to share my screen here. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about annual monitoring, specifically walking on the ground. For anybody who works in stewardship, I would say that this is probably the most fun part of our job, right? We probably all enjoy the outdoors. So I'm happy to talk about it. Today we're going to discuss why it matters, the importance of knowing your property boundaries, planning your visits and conducting them, the importance of record keeping, and we'll have time at the end to answer some questions. So I am from Northwest Connecticut Land Conservancy. My name is Mary Walsh. I'm the stewardship specialist here. We conduct aerial monitoring through satellite imagery, so I'm responsible for all of that. I also manage our conservation easements by acting as liaison to the landowners, authoring baseline documentation reports, fielding questions, and managing violations and encroachments on all of our land. And I also manage our geographic information system mapping. To tell you a little bit about NCLC, we are the largest land trust by the numbers of properties that we protect. We own over 334 properties across 7,000 acres. We have an additional around 7,000 acres under easement. And in total, we protect 566 properties, over 14,400 acres. We work in Litchfield County and Northern Fairfield County. We work in wildlands, including 31 public nature preserves, and we also protect 56 working farms. We have 14 board members, and we're lucky enough to have 11 staff members. 10 of us are full-time. That includes 3 people on our stewardship team. We have 3 town-level advisory boards that come to us through mergers and people who are involved in the other organizations. And that includes 19 advisory council members. Now I'll pass it off to Leif and Bob.
Oh, thanks, Mary. Bob and I are here representing the Essex Land Trust. It's, I say, on the opposite end of the spectrum of Mary's organization. So just to give you an idea of what smaller operation handles a similar type of work. I'm the Preserves Management Director. Basic responsibilities are to oversee all of our stewards. We have a total of 41 stewards and trail monitors that are I assign to various preserves that are under our ownership, and work to make sure we've got budgets established, control spending, and then all the tools and resources we need to basically do our job trying to maintain our properties. And Bob, if you want to introduce yourself. I think you're muted, Bob.
There we go. Yeah, I've been with the Land Trust since 2006 on the board for that amount of time, and then been involved with the evolution of our organization and our stewardship program over that time period. That's
So thanks, Mary. So we basically have about 762 acres of fee-owned property, and roughly 8 acres that are under 2 different easements. So we're more dealing with fee-owned properties, but we do have a couple of easements, one of which is a little more active, I would say, than the other one. Total of 24 preserves, and the property that the Land Trust owns represents about 2/3 of the total open space left in the town of Essex. Next one. This is a map that shows the town-owned open space as well as the open space that we own across the 3 villages that make up the town of Essex. So Iverton, Centerbrook, and Essex, right on the Connecticut River, just before it empties into Long Island Sound. So we're about 4 or 5 miles north of Old Saybrook. Our structure, as you can see, those are pretty big numbers for such a small organization, but it's 100% volunteer. So we have a lot of people to basically handle the workload that's required. So we all basically chip in to get things done. We've got 11 members on our board. As I mentioned, the 41 stewards and trail monitors. We're also very fortunate. We have some good contacts with the University of Connecticut and the Audubon Society, where we've got some experts that are helping volunteer and provide technical advice on various projects. So as an example, we're currently working with a botanist and an expert in open habitat, and then also a forester from Yukon. So it's just great to have that someone you could reach out to when we've got issues technical issues that we're not sure how to handle. Next one.
Okay. So why does monitoring matter? We all have an obligation to protect our lands in perpetuity. So that's, of course, a very long time. So going out to our properties protects their conservation values. It also creates a defensible legal record, which can be very, very important should any issues come up on our land. It allows a timely response to that. It also can help to maintain and strengthen relationships with our community members. And on top of that, it is an LTA accreditation requirement. And if you utilize terra firma, which I'll go through in just a moment briefly, is also a requirement for that. So the Land Trust Alliance standards and practices, I highly recommend going in there and reading all of these in detail. They actually updated it in 2026. So if you haven't seen that yet, definitely go through. Standards 11 and 12 are going to be what you want to look at for stewardship of your lands. For the LTA and for actually accreditation, they require that we must monitor our properties annually. If you're using aerial monitoring like NCLC, you need to go on the ground at least once every 5 years and document those inspections within 3 months. You need to address management issues in a timely manner, which leaves a little bit of room for interpretation. But you need to maintain clear monitoring policies and records. Terra firma, if you're not familiar with it, it's a conservation defense insurance. It has 3 eligibility criterias, 4 of which are important to what we're discussing today, and they mirror the accreditation requirements. So we need to, again, monitor all properties annually, see them once on the ground at least every 5 years if we're utilizing aerial imagery, document the inspections, and have a written policy for record keeping. One thing I want to note that is if you're thinking as far as in terms of accreditation, you'll be thinking in calendar years, but for terra firma, the policy year actually begins on March 1st with an April 30th deadline to place a claim for the prior year. So keeping those deadlines in place is important if you're dealing with a violation or potential violation or encroachment. All right, steps for a successful monitoring program. First and foremost, knowing your boundaries is absolutely essential. We can't properly steward our land if we don't know where it is. Planning ahead for safety and to make sure we know what we're looking for is incredibly important. And then we need to monitor our properties carefully and respond to issues properly. And one thing you'll hear me say over and over again in this presentation is that everything should be documented, however big or small. So first of all, knowing your boundaries. The only legally defensible property boundary is one determined by a licensed surveyor. So what will a licensed surveyor do? They will create an A2 survey map, which is the industry standard for accuracy. Some surveys that you see, you might see class D on them, and that's not really sufficient to what we're trying to do. So A2 is really what you want. They can install boundary markers, iron pins or cement monuments. And if you're lucky, they might share GPS points with you if possible, or shape files, which is just a digitized file of your property boundaries. For the best practices, we want to get these surveys done at the time of acquisition. And if possible, go out there with the surveyors. That's not always possible because of time restrictions, capacity. Surveyors often have moving timelines, but if you can, it's good to go out there. If you don't have a great survey for your property and you get one later on, that should be closely documented. Sometimes you can get a property pinned but not mapped. I wouldn't recommend that, but if that's what you're going to do, that's something that can easily get lost in records, especially as time goes on. So documenting those is incredibly important. Once they are pinned or you do have an appropriate survey, marking the boundaries with land trust signage is incredibly helpful. It's incredibly helpful to land stewards in your organization, but can also be a great way to curb potential encroachments onto your land. In the best world, and hopefully we're all doing this, but any violations or encroachments that are observed should be resolved prior to closing. Baseline documentation reports should be authored for easements at closing, and management plans should be completed within 6 months of closing on acquisitions. So all of those things are dependent on knowing where your boundaries are. If you don't have pins or a great survey, there are a lot of sources of error, and these are really common. Online tax parcel data. Many of us have probably seen this. Municipalities are required to share their digitized parcel files with their regional council of governments annually. And so that is available on town assessor websites, and it's also available through the state. It can be great for general understanding of boundaries, but I have found over and over again that is not a perfect system. We work in 19 towns, and across those 19 towns, I wouldn't completely trust any of the publicly available data. On the left-hand side here, you can see that I drew our survey over a public map. In the dark black lines, that's the publicly available tax parcel data, and that highlighted line there is the survey, but the survey shows. So in many areas, it's really close, but you can also see that it's really off in some areas, which can cause issues later. Another common source of error is looking at landmarks and wrongly assuming that they mark property boundaries. Here in New England, as we know, there's a ton of old stone walls, and many people assume that they're property boundaries. Here on the right-hand side, you can see a stone wall marked with a white and green dotted line, and again, the yellow highlighted line, which is the actual surveyed boundaries. And in this photo, you can see how that caused quite a bit of confusion on the neighboring properties' understanding of their lines. They wrongly assumed the stone wall was the property boundary, and because of that, we have a lawn encroachment. Their pool is pretty close to the property boundary there. And you can also see that's actually a wood pile, but it could easily be something like a shed. So that's something to keep an eye out for. So what do you do if you go out on a property? You can go out there and use a paper survey to walk the boundaries and see if you can locate these landmarks put in by a surveyor. So I'm talking about metal pins, the cement monuments. Once you find those, I recommend taking GPS points of the surveys. I do want to acknowledge that GPS units and our phones are not perfect. So what I do is I stand on the pin or the monument and take my time, take a point, wait a minute or two, and you'll see that your location might shift a little bit according to the GPS. Take another point, wait a little while, take another one, and then you can go back and use those 3 points to get a rough idea of where the pin or the monument actually is. So it's not perfect, but it's a good strategy. I highly recommend taking photos of these points. And I don't mean photos of just the pins. I have done that in the past, mostly just to get a point, a GPS point, but they aren't always very helpful. So zooming out a little bit, it's very helpful to get some landmarks in the photos. That can help you or future stewards get an idea of where these pins are. You can use the surrounding land, maybe a lawn in this case, or even the trees, to go out in the field, sleuth a little bit, and find where that pin is in the future. And then, of course, again, document that. If you take the time to figure it out, make it easy for the next person to figure it out so that they don't have to repeat that process. Digitizing boundaries. Again, this is not as good as getting a surveyor from a licensed surveyor. But if you have historical surveys or if you're using things like trail maps, it can be a good first step. If you're not familiar with LiDAR, it's basically a method where 3D maps of terrains are created. And the neat thing about this is that it's incredibly accurate and it also goes through vegetation. So even in a highly densely forested area, you'll be able to see landmarks on the ground. So you'll be able to see things like stone walls or streams. And then you can use LiDAR and a survey that you have to do something called georeferencing, which I like to think of as taking a survey map and pinning it onto a globe. It's assigning survey points to their geographical locations. At a large scale, like in this picture here, it's not always accurate because a globe is round. But small scale, for properties that we're dealing with, it's pretty darn accurate. Usually when I do it, I get the property boundaries within a 100th of an acre to what's recorded and spread that out across a whole property boundary. That's just it being off a few feet here and a few feet there. Here's an example of where I've done that. You can actually see the stone walls. They're those lines that look a little raised, and you can use that. And a lot of surveys have those stone walls on them to pin this flat survey onto the globe and then trace that line to create your property boundaries. That is something that can be done by some GIS professionals and contractors, or it can be done in-house if you have GIS software. NCLC was founded in 1965. And like I said, we have over 500 properties, which means that recently we've done a very good job of mapping our boundaries. But historically, some of the surveys are lacking in detail. They don't show if there's survey pins. And in many old deeds and easements, there might not even be a survey. They might just be a property description. So what I'm doing is I'm systematically updating all of our digitized boundaries to make sure that they are as accurate as possible. We are obtaining new surveys where the old ones aren't sufficient. And I'm updating these boundaries in ArcPro, which is a GIS software. I'm updating them in Landscape, which is a software we use for ground monitoring. I'll touch on that briefly later. And in Lens, which is the software we use for aerial monitoring, which I'll touch on in the next session in this series. And Leaf and Bob have some additional techniques that they use.
Yeah, it's just, as you can imagine, with a smaller organization, the critical thing for us, and Mary mentioned it earlier, is you really need to be there when the surveyor is out taking a survey. So whenever we have an acquisition, we have a professional survey, redone on the property, so it's updated and new, and we basically go along with them and mark where the landmarks are for the survey. So whether that's just colored tape that we hang, or we'll bring out posts sometimes and pound those in as well. So it's just easy to visually see them. And then we'll go back through the property over the next week or so and put up Essex Land Trust boundary markers all along the property line, so that it's in the future, it's very easy for us to just follow the signage to understand where that boundary is. If there is any kind of an issue, suspected issue, we will literally go out with the paper survey and then also use the GPS points from the survey to line up to see if the potential infraction is basically over the boundary line or not. And then the other thing we've done, since we have mapped all of our trails, we have worked with Yukon and had all that information uploaded to the Connecticut Trail Finder application. So that's also helpful to, at least for the trails, have all that digitized, for future reference.
Okay. So you know your property boundaries. Now you're ready to plan your visit. A few things you want to consider is scheduling, training and safety, reaching out to landowners and neighbors, and reviewing your records prior to visiting the property. When you're considering your scheduling, there are some important parts to look at. Season and weather conditions, of course. You're not going to go out there if there's a heat advisory or if there's 2 feet of snow on the ground. Another thing to consider is hunting season and the safety around that. And if the purpose of protecting a property, or if one of your main management goals is to protect a rare, endangered, threatened species, knowing those species are likely to be observed and plan around that. Look at your property features ahead of time if you can. Is there a cliff? And you would think you'd be able to walk a boundary, and in reality, you can't. Is a lot of it wetlands, vegetation? Are you going to run into a thicket of, autumn olive or Japanese barberry or another invasive, impassable species, and how big is your property. With easements, you want to make sure that you can observe all provisions, restrictions, allowances. So if there's something that depends on season, you want to go out when that can be viewed. If a landowner can only mow 3 times a year, try to go out during the summer or fall. Don't go out in the winter or early spring. And landowner availability. If you're going to coordinate with anybody, think about when they'll be around, why you want to meet with them, and make sure that you'll actually be able to see them. Training is absolutely essential for a few reasons, for protecting your organization and for safety. So again, you'll need a written procedure, and that will include the things like your monitoring program details, and you might have some internal guidelines with less official information, including things like what to pack or what to consider as far as safety. Around here, we're looking specifically at ticks, I would say, is one of at least my largest occupational hazards. You might want to consider wearing high visibility clothing and having them have a first aid kit and when 2 people should go out. You need to communicate, have everyone know how to communicate with the public and with interested parties, what they can say, what they can't say. Of course, if you're using any technology, stewards need to know how to use that. And they also need to know what to look for on a property. So what NCLC does is, like I mentioned before, we have a staff of 10 with 3 stewardship staff members. We're really lucky in that regard. So our monitoring is conducted by staff only. We have learned that that's the best way to ensure proper documentation and proper ground monitoring techniques. We receive on-the-ground training and in-office training. We are all wilderness first aid certified. And we always tell people where we are, right? That's something that anybody who spends time in the outdoors knows, right? We should always tell people where we are, maybe who we're with, when they should expect us back. And we also have internal guidelines on safety, including having 2 people visit properties that are over 150 acres. And when different monitoring techniques should be utilized. So here's some information on what Essex Land Trust does.
Yeah, it's fairly similar, just on a smaller scale, obviously. And again, all of our monitoring is done by the volunteer stewards. We do train the new stewards before they actually conduct the survey, but most of it is done on the job. So we basically walk with them and explain what we're looking for and how to document it. We have forms already made out that meet the Land Trust Alliance guidelines for accreditation, so that the documentation lines up with what the requirements are. We have a number of training materials that we keep on an online portal that's available for our stewards as well. The most important ones are, we have a handbook that explains the duties of the stewards. We also have these property inspection reports that the steward brings with them when they're doing their annual review. And then for easements, we have another report that they bring out, paper, clipboard, and document things as they're monitoring the easement boundaries. I think you mentioned earlier, things like photos is really helpful. There's only so much you can write, but to actually take photos, helps tremendously. And then some general information that we have as well for the stewards that aren't necessarily used during the actual monitoring, but it's certainly good to have that knowledge, especially of invasive plants, so that you can certainly note them on the monitoring report where there's excessive amounts of Japanese barberry or something like that. that helps us for developing our work plans for the upcoming year, as well as any kind of budget needs for repairs and things. But as you mentioned, Mary, the big thing is to be consistent and document everything you see and take lots of pictures.
And speaking of pictures, the one thing I would add to the importance of what Mary said about having a context for the photos, we've found it's helpful to identify the photos on a survey and with a directional arrow in which the photo was taken, so if you're on the point, you know exactly what you were looking at when you took the photo.
Yeah,
it's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Reaching out to people ahead of time. For easements, this might be a legal requirement. Most of our easements require at least a 2-week notice to landowners when we're going to go out to their property. It can also reduce the risk to the land trust by making people aware that the open land is actually owned and cared for by an organization. It can help to build relationships, and it can help to resolve conflicts past and future. So what we do is we always research ownership changes and be absolutely sure to reach out to those new landowners. We reach out to all of them, but when it's a new landowner, we take special care to reach out to them and introduce ourselves. Knowing their preferred communication method is pretty key for us. There are some landowners who will just throw out any letter that looks like it might be spam. And so they might prefer emails. That's good to know. There are other landowners who might not even use email or don't check it. So then the opposite is true. They may prefer a method or a letter. So you want to make sure they know when you're coming by reaching out to them in the way that they need. And again, we need to provide this notice prior to the visits, and if possible, coordinate a time to visit with them if you feel comfortable with that and they prefer that.
Yeah, and for the easement properties, basically follow the same process. We will send them a letter to notify them, or at least remind them that there is a conservation easement, for example, behind their property, and then also provide them with our contact information. We also will set up a meeting with them to create the baseline. I'm forgetting the word, BDL, baseline condition report. And so that they understand, the current state and how it needs to be. And a lot of one of our main easement property backs up to a subdivision, wetland area. So you can imagine folks tend to start creeping over that line at the back of their property that falls into the easement. So we want to make sure that they clearly understand what they can and cannot do in that section. For all of our properties, we try to notify abutters if we've got any significant projects for the property that are planned, especially things that will cause excessive traffic or noise or something, or heavy equipment. It's just a lot easier to deal with it prior to us starting the work than they'll start calling the town and saying, hey, something's going on here, or start calling the land trust, and then we're trying to circle back to explain things. So it's better to just proactively tell them, what we're going to be doing. We also are through the town. They send out abutter notices, and we're copied on all of those that are near either directly abut or are near our property for us to review as well. So we get a heads up of any requested easement variances, for example, or extending a deck or moving a driveway or something like that. That's, within, less than the allowed distance to either a wetland or a border or something. And then, I think you mentioned it earlier as well, but if there's any issues with easement violation, especially, things like wetland violations, which are probably the most common thing we're dealing with, we will work with the local town board to get those types of things resolved. So we'll notify for example, the Inland Wetlands Commission of an infraction and bring them out to double check and all that. And then they'll usually take the lead then with the homeowner on what the requirements are to bring it back to its original state.
In addition to what Leaf says, a couple things that we at NCLC do is we contact our easement landowners once at least annually. Instead of sending out batch emails when we look at satellite imagery, we found it easier just to send out one letter in the beginning of the year to everyone to remind them who we are, to remind them that they have an easement on their land. And we include with that questionnaire to make sure that we have their proper contact information, that they inform us of any new developments on the land, natural or man-made. We also sometimes collect additional information through that questionnaire. We, in the past, have included a question about what topics landowners would like to learn about. This year, we wanted to learn a little bit more about the farms that we protect. So what kind of crops are being harvested? What kind of livestock is there? What's the name of the farm? They probably call it something different from what we do. So we want to make sure that we have accurate information on all of that. If we are visiting a property on the ground that year, we do reach out to the landowner a second time before we plan to actually go out and visit. In the annual letter and in the pre-visit communication, we invite the landowner out with us. We want them to know that we're available to walk with them. We want to teach them about their property. We want conservation to be on the top of their mind. We want to develop those relationships. With new landowners, we go a step further and we send out a whole packet. This includes a paper copy of the easement. It includes the filed survey. It includes our recent publications, so perhaps our newsletter or our annual impact report. We have a card that has all of our conservation success statistics on it, like how many miles of streams and rivers we protect, how many acres for rare, threatened, and endangered species we protect, things of that sort. We don't reach out to all of our neighbors. I did a very preliminary analysis of how many we have. It's over 2,000. As you know, Connecticut has a lot of small parcels, so it means we have a lot of neighbors in some places. But we do reach out to neighbors if we acquire a property, or if they are very close abutters. Sometimes when you're walking a property line, it can basically be right behind someone's house. And if they come out, you never know who you're going to be interacting with or what level of friendliness or animosity you'll encounter. So we sometimes do reach out to those people ahead of time. And if we have plans for property improvements, like Leaf said, we do reach out to neighbors. We recently acquired a 670-acre property that will be a public nature preserve. So we did targeted strategic outreach on that because I know I would want to know if the land behind me was going to be a public nature preserve. So we make sure to reach out to those folks as well. The last essential step in planning is reviewing all pertinent documents. This is especially important to people who don't live in the weeds of these things. I know I'm always reading easements and deeds and looking at surveys, but if it's someone who just goes out a couple times a year to maybe 1 or 2 properties, this is a really important part of their training. Should always know what the easement terms are and read any deeds, because sometimes they do have restrictions in them and you don't want that to get lost. Always look at past monitoring reports. They have some really important institutional knowledge in there, and they can show how the property changed over time. Management plans and BDRs should always be looked at, baseline documentation reports. They really dictate what needs to be focused on in the report you'll write after your visit. Prior issues, you're going to want to compare what a property looks like now to what it was if there was a major encroachment or violation to an easement in the past. And this actually goes along with past monitoring reports. If a neighbor encroached on a property 3 years ago and you're new to your organization, you might only know that if you go back and look at all these files. And if there's a new encroachment on that land, you want to know that this is an ongoing issue. This isn't something new. If someone was required to remediate the issue in some way, you want to check on the progress of that, make sure you're aware that that happened. And again, always look at your surveys, understand the boundaries, identify high-risk areas to make sure that you are stewarding the land in a proper way and as the best as you possibly can. Now that you've planned, you're going to actually conduct the site visit. So you're going to consider field methods. We'll talk about picking your inspection route, coordinating with others, and the importance of documentation and record keeping. So field methods you might want to consider: tracking your locations. We talked about GPS a minute ago. So having a GPS unit or your smartphone is very helpful. You're going to look for those survey boundaries and pins, and also your organization's posts, and creating a track map. So you can use an app that actually tracks where you go, and you can see that line and make sure you hit all of the spots, and help you not get lost in the woods. Bob talked about photographing, and again, that's really important. And taking photos of high-risk areas or areas encroachment seems pretty obvious, but I also want to say how important general site condition photos can be. It might seem like you're taking a photo of nothing, just a forest where nothing's going on, but that can be incredibly important later. It can show you maybe how invasives are coming in. It can also show you that if a property all of a sudden doesn't have any trees, and you look at last year and there were trees, that can be an incredibly important piece of evidence should this potential violation be escalated to review by your insurance company or your attorney. If it goes into litigation, it gives you a timestamp on when that type of thing could have happened. And again, you can use those landmarks to compare the photos. So you can look at outcrops or trees to orient yourself to where these issues are. Or if it's a tree line along a boundary, you'll understand better what the property was like at that time and be able to hopefully curb any encroachments that increase over time. Take notes. If you're like me, you're going to forget things, and you might think, oh, there's no way I'm going to forget that. No way I'm going to forget that person's name, or no way I'm going to forget any little detail, where that stand of trees was exactly, or maybe what species you saw. So take notes to ensure your report is well detailed later. Document all interactions, landowners, neighbors, anybody walking the trail. This can be incredibly helpful to inform future outreach. If you have other people who are working in development or public outreach, they'll want to know who you talked to and what you talked about. And it can protect your organization later. So if you have a conversation with somebody and they say, well, you said this, well, you can go back in your file and say, no, I definitely said that. And again, safety first. So make sure you pack a bag, know what you need to have. In addition to all these things written here, consider maybe a bear whistle or, something of that sort. Wearing branded clothing, especially high visibility clothing, can help immensely. If you are wearing your organization's t-shirt, people will know for certain who you are. And one thing we do is we identify our vehicles. So I actually have an NCLC magnet that I put on my car so that when I'm just pulled over on the side of the road, people know that I'm not some suspicious person. I'm there for a reason. And couple that with putting your organization's markers on your trees or on your boundary along a road, then people really know you're there for a reason. And those boundaries can be posted, like I said, along the road, but also on your interior boundaries as well. So I always carry a hammer and some tags to try to keep up on that. If you go out with another party, it's really important that you set expectations and that you're the one to lead a visit. I've been out to conservation easements where the landowner is subtly trying to lead, perhaps to steer me away from something that they're doing that they maybe shouldn't be doing. And just be aware of that. I always assume the best out of people, but you just never know. So you want to tell them, I'm here to visit the whole property, not just this one little area. I'm going to be looking for violations and encroachments, but don't be scared about that. It's just part of what we do. And again, make sure you are the one leading, not them. Choose an appropriate transportation method. I have gone out in gators with landowners and they'll drive me around. But again, even if they're driving, you're leading. But before you do that, make sure it's allowed by an easement or you feel comfortable with it on the land that you own and there's no deed restriction against it. And even if you do that, just make sure you have a visible of all the areas of the property. The other thing that you want to consider is physical abilities of you and the person you're walking with. I have walked out with landowners who are along in age and they feel really confident in going out with me, and then it turns out it's not safe. I've been with somebody who fell and couldn't get up, or somebody who was getting really winded, and luckily we were with a family member and they're like, we should definitely turn around. You keep going, but we're going to back up. So keep all of those things in mind when you're going out too. Be ready to answer questions, but never speak in absolutes. If you go out and you tell someone, oh, you can absolutely do that on your easement, but then you get back to the office and you look at it a little closer and have questions, and let's say you talk about it with your attorney and they say, oh, no, you absolutely can't. That puts you in a sticky situation. It can also put future stewards in a sticky situation. I've been out on properties where they said, well, someone told me 6 years ago that I could do this. And then they get really mad when you tell them, no, sorry, we said that. That's not right. And this is a really good opportunity to educate people. Again, educate your landowners on the easement terms. A lot of people, especially for aging land trusts where we're on subsequent owners, we're not dealing with the grantors anymore. They're not going to be familiar with their easements in the way that you might hope that they are. So mention those during the visit. Teach them about the natural resources or the history of the program or your program or of the natural landscape. I have found that people love when you can tell them the specifics of species on their properties. So keep that in mind too. And then again, document. Okay, this is absolutely essential for responsible stewardship. Again, it can protect you against potential legal action in the future. If somebody says, no, I didn't cut those trees. Well, you can say, yes, you definitely did. Here's what we have to back that up. Provides a snapshot in time. Again, perpetuity is a really, really long time. So it's nice to be able to look back and see what properties looked like in years and decades past. And that can be incredibly helpful for future land stewards. And again, a lot of this is an accreditation and terra firma requirement. So even if you don't think something is important, they're going to want to see it. With that, for monitoring reports, which is really going to be the core of this documentation, the LTA and terra firma really wants to know who, what, where, when, why, how. So who was there, who you are, what the name of the property is, when you were there, when you completed the report, and observations on the conditions and conservation values. So if an easement says there can be no structures, say there are no structures. Don't just, leave that out, say how things are going as far as the easement terms. And of course, you're going to want to include any observations on potential violations. Some other things to consider is that track map, photographs, information on who was present, how you got around, even things like weather can be great to write down, because that again tells you later that you were actually there. Yes, it was 50 degrees, or yes, there was 6 inches of snow on the ground. It just adds credibility to you and your honesty, and is just a really good thing to consider in putting in your reports. So here is how Essex Land Trust goes around about their monitoring.
All right, thanks, Mary. Yeah, the interesting thing is even an organization as small as ours, a lot of the examples you were giving were things we've actually come across as well. So that it does happen, I think, at all levels. So for our annual inspections, we just decided to initiate those in September. I basically give the stewards roughly a month to get them done. So I'll get some right away, the beginning of September. Some I'll get, close to the end of the month, and sometimes it leaks into October. But we basically try to get everything done about in that timeline, and then that gives us time to review all the information. And then also, I use the feedback from the inspections to develop the upcoming year's budget for steward work. So that timing kind of allows me to get my budget finalized in November for board review in December. So that's kind of how we ended up with that time of year. The weather's also a bit nicer. It's not as wet, so a lot of the lower lying areas will be drier at that point, so it's easier just to get around. If the stewards identify any findings, a lot of them they resolve right on the spot. Otherwise, we'll try to follow up and get those fixed within a few days. A lot of the findings are typically signs have fallen down, and so we'll want to make sure that those particularly get resolved quickly, just so it doesn't get away from us on those boundary line markings. I personally review all of the inspections, and then we have a digital repository software called Box, and we store all that digitally on that. We used to handle things with paperwork, a lot more paper copies, and then had to get uploaded to a system. So now I have the stewards sending me an electronic version, whether they take the paper copy back home and enter it into a Word document and send it to me, or literally just take photos of what they've written down, and then those I can upload into our repository so we have them. And then I think, as I mentioned, so the inspections we use then for work for the upcoming year. So whether it's bridge repair, any kind of easement issue that needs to get resolved with the homeowner, things of that nature.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate you saying how you chose September for your monitoring visits. I think dealing with things like, especially ground conditions, is something that a lot of stewards learn the hard way or over time. Um, so knowing what a property is like and documenting that in the monitoring reports and both the baseline data reports and the management plans and through photos, it can be very helpful. You're not going to want to go to a property with a forested wetland when it's been raining all summer. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So what we do is we group our properties, and that's based on management plans. We group them in the management plans as well, so that we can treat them as one. And for accreditation purposes, if you're doing that, if you're treating a group of properties as one, that means that you can walk the boundaries of that group. You can walk an internal loop in that group. So if you don't get to walk on a 4-acre parcel in the middle, it's okay, because it's part of this larger group of properties. Easements you can also group if they're owned by the same landowner and they have similar easement terms. When you do group properties, it's really important to list them separately in your reports. That's an accreditation requirement and also just a best practice. If those groupings change for whatever reason over time, you want to know what individual properties you saw. Like I mentioned before, we utilize something called Landscape. It's an online software. It has a desktop version and a mobile app, and it tracks your movements in the field. So this blue dotted line in this photo is the route that I walked, and it creates and stores these geotagged photos. So these blue dots on this map are actually photo points, and those can be labeled on the report, and then the photographs are included in the report. And actually, Bob mentioned before, noting what direction that you are looking in, and that's something else that Landscape captures and can be included on a map. This is also really helpful for baseline documentation reports, I find. You can also create custom reports within Landscape, which is really neat. So everybody utilizing the platform is working with the same report template. And these are actually interactive reports. So we use the same template for both fee and easement, but depending on how you answer questions, it leads you to different questions. So if it asks, is this a fee or easement property? And you click easement, it will ask if there are any potential violation to the terms of the easement. But if you say you are monitoring a fee property, the next question might be, are there any risks to the conservation values or the management goals or something like that? So that's a really great feature of this software. And it's also incredibly easy to track violations and encroachments. So I personally really like the software, but there are other field apps as well. It's not the only one. As far as our schedule, we have so many properties. We have over 500. We do monitor by satellite, as I mentioned, but we have to see them on the ground every 5 years. So we have a rotational schedule, and we see about a fifth of our properties each year, which is over 100 properties. So we have to do it throughout the year. We actually split the work. I see the easements on the ground, and our public lands manager sees all of our fee properties on the ground for the most part. And then reporting, we file them electronically in our shared drive, and then we also store them on Landscape for easy access for the stewardship staff. And having that secure documentation storage is also an accreditation requirement. So I should mention that as well. After that, if there is an encroachment or violation, we review it as a team and elevate it if necessary. And then next, in 2 sessions from now within this series, I'm going to go more into violations and encroachments. So a few takeaways: knowing your property boundaries is absolutely essential. You don't want to be observing the wrong land, and you don't want to be missing any land. Proper training and safety ensure smooth inspections, and they also keep you safe. So write that out if you're using volunteers, or if you have someone's new on staff. It's even more important. Set the expectations. Tell them, don't risk your safety, which I have found is especially important if you're young. You sometimes need to hear that. And its documentation is absolutely key for legal defensibility, resolution of issues, land management, and to pass on organizational wisdom. We want people to be able to read back and know what we were thinking, or know what our lands were like at that time. And monitoring is a great way to connect with our community. It's a great way to keep in touch with easement landowners and get to know your neighbors. And, those folks might become more involved in your organization because of that. They might come to your events in the future. They could become donors or members to your organization. So it's a good way to be an active member of that community. With that, we now have some time for questions.
Yeah, so first question we have in the Q&A is, we tend to monitor late fall when visibility and navigation is easier. Is there any requirement to mix that up year to year?
There's no requirement, but there are pros and cons to it. One is if you vary your monitoring schedule, you can see the land at different times of year. So you don't just know what it looks like in the fall, but you know what it looks like in the winter, where conditions might be totally different, or in the early spring, where there might be a species that you'd miss otherwise. It does, if you do it at the same time of year, it is a lot easier to compare the property conditions over time. So you get that annual snapshot. So there are pros and cons to each. Accreditation, it's just required that you see it once annually, once per calendar year.
Next question. We need to redesign some of the trail maps for our trailhead kiosks soon. Do you recommend a DIY approach or working with a professional map designer? If the latter, do you have any designers that you recommend?
So that is a great question. I think it completely depends on your capacity. We've historically done it in-house. So if you want to go that route, I would say go for it. I've seen other land trusts who actually have hand-drawn maps, and they're beautiful. So you could even go that route. We actually right now are in the beginning stages of working with a firm who does professional mapping specifically for trail maps. So we're really early on in that process. But I think it's going to lighten our load quite a bit, and none of us have any graphic design experience. So I'm sure they'll be much prettier than what we'd make. We're using a company called Green Goats, but again, we're early on in this property, and there are a lot of organizations or companies that you can look into. So if you want to talk about that a little bit more, we can talk. You can reach me offline. But I would say really it's just capacity based.
Any other questions? Feel free to type your questions in the chat or um,
All right, well, if there's no more questions now, we are available. If you'd like to email me at any time and go over this, you can feel free to reach out to me. I have stewardship experience at a few different organizations, so I've seen different methods, and I've seen what works and what doesn't. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody and just share what I've learned, or even, talk back and forth about what works for you and just learn from each other.
We have one last question.
Oh, sure.
Did you say that towns are required to update new surveys annually?
Not new surveys necessarily, but their digitized parcel boundaries. So I know that a lot of towns do update those based on surveys when they get them, but not always. So they are required to submit that data by May 1st every year, I believe. So that is something that's updated every single year, but it's not always based on surveys for each parcel.
Yeah, and that means even when you identify an issue, it can take 6 to 12 months for the town to reflect it in their GIS system.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even things like subdivisions, it depends on timing.
Right.
And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the state has a geodatabase portal where that can be found. And that's a really helpful website that has a whole lot of data on it. So it's really fun to poke around and see what there is in that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary and Bob and Leaf. And thank you everyone for attending today. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place. So look forward to seeing you then.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, everybody.